point. As you just heard, we will be recording the meeting. So if you have colleagues that are unable to attend today, you can find the recording of this briefing on the GBV AoR website, which we will link in the chat. My name is Jessica Gorham, and I am the Regional Emergency GBV Advisor, working on behalf of the Global GBV AoR, but based here in Nairobi with my team. But for this occasion, I am also the co-chair of the Regional GBV Working Group for East and Southern Africa. And we are co-hosting this briefing today, along, of course, with our colleagues in Somalia, particularly members of the GBV AoR in Somalia. The GBV AoR is the global coordination mechanism for gender-based violence in emergencies, and we are obviously made up of member organizations who are implementing GBV programming, both prevention and response at country level. So for today's event, if it's the first time that you have been attended a briefing that the regional working group has implemented, you'll know that we like to keep our briefings and all of our events to 1 hour. We do ask that you turn off your videos because many people are joining us from places where the Wi-Fi is not so strong. And please stay on mute throughout the presentations. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and I will be monitoring the chat throughout the briefing today. So please do put your questions, write them in the chat. I will collect them and then present them to the speakers at the end. We find that this is a good way for us to minimize time, and so that we can also put similar questions grouped together. We have a full agenda today, and I'm happy to introduce our speakers for today's event, which is, as I mentioned, a briefing on the situation in drought-affected communities in Somalia. Our first presentation will be led by the GBV AoR coordination team based in Somalia. We are joined today by Elizabeth Keegan, who is the GBV AoR coordinator on Surge in Mogadishu. She is also joined by Abdelkhalid Ishaq Adan, who is our GBV AoR Information Management Officer. He's going to be taking us through some of the most updated dashboards, particularly looking at one-stop centers and then women and girls safe spaces. And then we also have on the line for any clarifying questions, Usman Mohammed, who is also the deputy coordinator of the GBV AoR in Somalia and also overseeing the GBV IMS. After their presentation, we will have Mohammed Jama, who is the program manager for SEDURO, which is the Social Economic Development and Human Rights Organization. I'm really happy that Jama is able to join us today. He is working in the field in Gedo. So really thankful that he's taken the time to join us today and to give us a firsthand perspective on what's going on out in some of these hard to reach locations. After Jama's short presentation, we will also have Hiba Hassan Ahmed, who is the GBV program manager for IMC, the International Medical Corporation of Somalia. And Hiba is joining us from Baidoa. So also please note that we're very, very fortunate to have two of our colleagues who are working on the front lines joining us today. So please do keep that in mind when you have your questions. If it's feel free to also, if it's out of the scope, we can always address it at the end. So without further ado, as I said, I want to keep us moving on time. I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth Keegan, who is our GBV AoR coordinator on Surge based in Mogadishu. Over to you, Elizabeth.
Okay, good afternoon, colleagues. I hope you can hear me. So I will go over the presentation and then hand over to my colleague, Khalid, for the interactive dashboard. So the overall context of the drought response and the impact of GBV in Somalia. Overall, close to 8 million people are affected, or half the population are affected by the worst drought in the last 4 decades, following 4 consecutive seasonal failures since October 2021. And this surpasses the 2010 to 2011 drought, as well as 2017 to 2018 in terms of duration and severity. Approximately 4 million people are displaced due to drought across Somalia, and emergencies disproportionately affect women and children. Thus, close to 80% of the displaced account for women and children. In terms of GBV AMS data, the GBV AMS recorded an increase of incidents reported accounting for intimate partner violence, close to 17% increase overall. And this may be due to stress in the household due to limited or no income as a result of the drought. The GBV-IMS also recorded 10% increase of reported incidents of rape in the drought-affected regions of Somalia, and the increase is correlated to the drought due to increase of GBV risks. For example, darkness in the settlements at night, women and girls trekking long distance in search of firewood and water and other basic services, sanitation facilities that are not safe, latrines not desegregated by gender and not lockable. So all these have led to increase in the risks that has led to increase of reported incidents of rape. According to the recent data of the recent multi-sector needs assessment, 16% of women that were interviewed reported that they do not feel safe and thus avoid the places where they don't feel safe, like latrines and bathing and sanitation facilities. The GBVMS also recorded 10% increase of women and girls accessing life-saving critical GBV response services due to rape, intimate partner violence, and other forms of GBV. And the multi-sector needs assessment, the respondents also, 35% of women and girls reported that they cannot move freely because of concerns over their safety. And sanitation facilities, as noted, is one of the drivers that led to increase of reported incidents of rape, IPV, and other forms of GBV. Just a caveat that this is based on reported incidents and does not reflect prevalence of GBV in Somalia. In terms of services, there is a strategy. As GBV AoR, we have the strategy for the scale up in the 31 drought affected communities across Somalia in the drought affected areas. Approximately 16 million is required for scale up of services. And this includes procurement and prepositioning of dignity kits, menstrual hygiene management kits, as well as the post-rape treatment kits. over 30,000 dignity kits and over 20,000 menstrual hygiene management kits were procured and prepositions accordingly, currently distributed by the service providers to the women and girls based on their needs. Post-rep treatment kits were also procured, 10 are preposition and 60 are on the pipeline. The GBV AoR is also engaging with other clusters on risk mitigation. We are in collaboration with the CCCM cluster. We've had 2 sessions on risk mitigation. We are also engaging the nutrition cluster, food security, and we will be initiating discussions also with the WASH cluster on risk mitigation, self-referrals of survivors in order to mitigate the GBV risks. Capacity development is also a priority in the strategy of the frontline workers working directly with the survivors in order to enhance the quality of care and their skills working with the survivors. During the second quarter of this year, 15 pool of trainers were certified for the CMR, clinical management of rep trainers. So they mentor and provide technical support to other CMR service providers in their respective areas. 14 new women and girls safe spaces are being established. A number of them have already been established in the priority areas, and the staff have been trained on referrals and dissemination of information in the safe spaces. 13 new one-stop centers have been established also as part of scale-up strategy, and the one-stop centers provide critical GBV response services, including case management, psychosocial first aid, legal assistance, as well as awareness raising on the available services and also on prevention of GBV. As part of the scale-up strategy on the human resource, a number of staff have also been deployed in the 3 hubs, which are in the hotspots of the drought-affected areas, Baidoa, Kismayo, Dolo, as well as Mogadishu. So staff have been deployed to support the coordination. I will now hand over to Khalid to present the interactive map. Over to you, Khalid.
Hi, everyone. Jessica, if you can just confirm if I'm audible enough.
Khalid, we can hear you well. You have approximately 5 minutes over.
I'll share my screen from my side, from my end. So the GBVR in Somalia is coordinated by UNFPA, and it's composed of 76 member organizations, including national and international organizations, funded by a wide variety of donors. 78% are national, that is local organizations that deliver life-saving GBV services. This is via mobile clinics and community outreach campaigns, and in-static facilities located in 76 districts that are often hard to reach and insecure. We have 2 dashboards that we would like to quickly take you through them. The first dashboard shows a spread of GBV facilities across Somalia. These are 25, if you can see here in this next chart, type of GBV facilities. These are 25, 36 GBV one-stop centers and women and girls spaces, which are 25, amounting to 61. There's a table here showing the GBV AoR partners responsible for the facilities in across the districts and which type of facility they're responsible for. There is we have a second dashboard. If I can just hover over. Jessica, could just confirm if you can see the second dashboard?
We can.
Great. So the second dashboard has 2 layers, one for the GBV facilities and the IPC, that is integrated phase classification. What is integrated first classification? It is an index that classifies population in a country based on the level of food insecurity in a country. It's a partnership between different NGOs and UN agencies, particularly WFP and FAO and others. What they look at is how many people are affected by food insecurity, and they're the ones who come up with the figures saying in certain region, a certain number of people are in the different first categories. When you select in this region, when you pick a certain region, for example, Bay, it will zoom and select the region, the region only in the map. There you can see how many facilities are there within that region, how many one-stop centers or women and girls services we have in that region, and which phase of the food security they are in. Here we are showing, let me select it. Here we are showing the areas where we need to prioritize in terms of how many women and girls safe spaces and one-stop centers we have compared to first classification of the food security. Areas where we don't have many centers, but there's a high security, high food insecurity level. This is an area that needs to be serviced, so it's needed to be prioritized. That's where donors need to target. There's a chart here showing the different GBV facilities. That's the Women Girls Safe Center, Safe Space, and the GBV One Stop Center. The chart below here showing population in acute food insecurity. It's showing the different levels. There is the stressed, which is IPC2, the crisis level, which is IPC3, emergency, IPC4, and famine. There is this note here showing the projected number of people who will be in phase 4 or 5. There is only one area in Bay which shows projections towards emergency and famine. Let me select that. The main crisis at the moment is drought and people being at a crisis level of food insecurity. Well, food insecurity is linked to a rise and increase in GBV cases, and that's why we have linked these two. The main crisis is triggering an increase in the number of GBV cases, even if it's not reported, but this is widely studied. Several research worldwide have shown that there is a huge linkage between these two. We need to be able to service those areas that have high levels of food insecurities. So areas where there's high food insecurity will tend to have an increase in GBV cases. If we don't have GBV facilities, that's women one-stop centers, women girls safe spaces, also shelters. In these areas, you can imagine women and girls in those areas not being able to receive the help they need. We should be able to have GBV facilities in these areas. We would love to have GBV facilities in these areas where the crisis is more severe. So where it's more severe, we would like to have a facility in place. That's all from me, Jessica. Over to you.
Thanks, Khalid. And if people would like to access the dashboards, what do they need to do? What link do they need to follow to access these dashboards so that they can interact with them themselves?
Yeah, we'll share the link. We'll share the link once it's once it's public. We'll share it out.
Okay, thank you.
Today. Thank you.
Elizabeth, any last thoughts before we turn over to Jama?
No, nothing from our end. So I see a few questions in the chat box. Perhaps we may go over and open the floor for questions, comments, and or any clarification.
I think we're going to take questions at the end, but if you could stop sharing your screen and then we'll have Jama's presentation shared. Thank you to the GBV AoR coordination team. And I see there are lots of questions in the chat, and I am noting them all, and they will be asked to our speakers at the end. But I'm waiting until the end because sometimes those questions get answered throughout the course of the presentations. So, but please note, I am also monitoring the chat. So thank you. Shiva, if you want to share, thank you. And I'll turn it over to Jama.
Thank you so much, colleagues. Good afternoon. Most of the people listening from me all over the world. Once again, my name is Muhammad Jama. I'm the program manager of Socioeconomic and Development Human Rights Organization. It's a national organization or local organization working in Jubaland, in Gedo and Lower Juba regions. And thematic area that we work is the GBV and child protection. Go ahead. Next slide. And most of the Jubaland people and the most vulnerable people are the female-headed households. Half of percentage of the population, so 80% of the population are female women and girls. Women and girls from minority clans are also the most vulnerable. Women and girls with a disability and adolescent girls as well are the most vulnerable. These are the most vulnerable groups in the communities who are recently affected by the drought and are currently are in outskirts of the main towns in search of food and shelter. Go ahead. The interventions currently we are doing, we have centers where we deal with comprehensive case management, our services including like psychosocial support, GBV, legal service. We do also a referral of health services or GBV services that need health attentions. We also have a safe shelters where we have centers for women and girls safety space. We have also women and women. We have one-stop centers as well. We normally do cash distribution or cash vouchers where we normally send money through mobile cash transfer. We also do distribution of menstrual hygiene and dignity kits, which are appropriate to culturally, and it is approved by the national GBV AoR. We also do awareness raising on harmonized messages approved by the cluster, the national GBV AoR, where we normally inform people the preventions and response and where they can receive services needed. We also do a capacity building on frontline workers and staffs as well as the local authorities or IDB leaders to know and report GBV, as well as them to be as agents to protect women and girls through violations. Next. Okay, what are the gaps now? In Jubaland, the gaps are most of the places they don't have lack of maybe there are lack of service bases and one-stop centers like districts of Elwak, Garbahare, Luke, and Burduba districts. These 4 districts, they don't have women and girls service bases and one-stop center. So that is the very and people are arriving day after day. Many people are also coming to the centers and newly established IDBs, but they don't have the services for them to receive. We also have there is a need of a GBV integrations and mainstreams into other sectors, preferably livelihood, nutrition, wash, and others, and shelter clusters. Partners who are doing these implementations or interventions, they need to do integration of GBV mainstreaming. And standby alone GBV assessment is something which is needed. Most of the assessments in the country are carried out by UN OCHA, and they normally don't prioritize in their assessments on GBV. Their priority is food security and nutrition, water as well. But we do request that as a GBV AoR or national, we do a GBV assessment alone stand so that we can know the gaps and services that are available for the newly affected people. So there are also lack of capacities of health staffs in some area, not all, especially in Elwak, where there are not even BEP kits, and rape cases are even taken to cross the border town to Kenya, where they might even get challenges of identifications or maybe in ID issues. So that is a gap also where in Elwak districts. Next slide. There are so many challenges, but few of them I can mention. There is a far distance, or maybe the newly displaced people mostly reside in new settlements, and there is a far distance between the service centers in some areas. So there is a need of service centers to be reallocated to their new places. Most of the drought affected people have been settled in new places, so there is a need for them to get the service and to be relocated. Local authorities in our area, most of them, sometimes they don't prioritize GBV as a life-saving issues, but they prioritize rather than food security, water, nutrition are their priorities, but GBV is not their priority. So there is a need to advocate a GBV as a tool, and it is an life-saving interventions. Security and accessibility for humanitarians is also an issue. Most of the places where we work, we can only reach, the humanitarians can reach a radius of 10 kilometers of every town. Other than we cannot reach and had to reach area, and it's a very problem that we cannot reach and to reach the drought affected people. Mostly what we reach is those people who arrive in main towns. There is a bending legal framework, CEDAW ratifications of CEDAW, FGM bills, and sexual offensive bills in the federal government as well as in the state level. So there is a need to advocate, and also these bills to be ratified in the federal, to be passed by the parliament, so that every person who do violations to be taken into account. Fears of retaliation and a failure to report some due to the deep-rooted social norms, people still, or survivors still fear to report cases, and that will cause under-reporting issues. And finally, less funding impact on GBV preventions, and most of the funds goes to the food securities, nutrition, wash, and that GBV, a portion of fund is reached, and that's a main challenge to our partners who are doing a GBV. That's why even the local authorities are thinking that GBV is not a prioritized and a priority project. Thank you so much for colleagues. Over to you.
Thanks, Jama, for your very concise presentation. We appreciate it. And remember that Jama is joining us from the field. He is in Gedo at the moment. So if you have specific questions about actually how the operation is running in some of these new field sites, please do put them in the chat, and we can ask Jama as he's there now in one of those drought affected communities. Our next presenter will be Hiba Hassan Ahmed, who is the GBV Program Manager for IMC, International Medical Corps. Over to you, Hiba.
Thank you, Jessica, and colleagues joining us from over the world. Again, my name is Hiba Hassan, working with IMC in Somalia. And currently I'm joining this call from Baidoa, one of the hotspots for this current drought. So IMC, the International Medical Corps, Somalia, we're implementing GBV prevention and response activities in 4 regions in Somalia, namely Banaadir, by region in Baidoa, Muduk, Southern Galkayo, and also Middle Shabelle in Johar district. And our GBV activities are integrated with health, wash, and nutrition services.
Can we have the next slide too? Just
Yeah.
that we keep, yeah, I think Hiba, if you could just mention when you
Yeah.
need to go to the next slide and she'll keep up with you.
Yeah, next please, Sharbin. Yeah, currently the main interventions that IMC is doing under the GBV program include GBV case management. IMC provides comprehensive GBV case management services through the existing health facilities and women and girls safe spaces. We provide clinical management of rape services, treatment of physical injuries for survivors of GBV, mental health and psychosocial support, MHPSS services, as well as referral to other services like legal aid and safety and security for survivors of GBV. During this drought, we have been witnessing significant increase of all incidents of GBV, particularly the physical assault and also sexual violence assaults. We also do implement women and girls safe spaces. IMC is currently operating 4 women and girls safe spaces in Mogadishu, Baidoa, Galkayo, and Johar. Those women and girls safe spaces are providing spaces for vulnerable women and girls, including GBV survivors, to access knowledge, information on SRH, GBV. Also, they access life skills building sessions, basic literacy and numeracy, group psychosocial and recreational activities. Also, these women and girls safe spaces are key entry point to the case management services. And during the last few months, significant increase of women and girls who are interested to participate in the services at the women and girls safe spaces have been noted, which is also contributing to overwhelming of the resources available for supporting the WGSS. And this is maybe due to the increasing displacements and due to the drought and insecurity in the operational areas. The other interventions include IMC is currently implementing community awareness raising and outreach activities. We do disseminate gender-based violence and harmful traditional practices prevention messages through IEC materials, house-to-house visits, and also awareness raising campaigns. IMC also is engaging community leaders, including religious and traditional elders, through quarterly meetings. IMC also has established GBV community support groups in the target host communities and IDPs. And those community support groups are really playing a key role in our GBV program, as they account for the largest proportion of referrals to the case management services. The community support groups also significantly support dissemination of the available GBV services among the communities. Other key intervention that we are doing is provision of dignity kits. We do distribute dignity kits, solar lamps, and whistles also. And during the procurement of those kits, we make sure that the kits contain items that are tailored towards the needs of the women and girls and have direct impact on their needs. And in response to the current drought and emergency, we are planning to distribute 1,200 dignity kits in the target locations, mostly the hotspot areas for drought, including Baidoa, Galkayo, and Mogadishu. We also do training of staff and frontline workers. We train health, wash, and nutrition staff, including female health workers, community hygiene promoters, and as well as the community volunteers like the GBV community support groups, nutrition mother-to-mother support groups on GBV basic concepts and core principles, psychological first aid, and self-referrals to ensure that GBV is mainstreamed into our interventions. And between June to October this year, we have so far trained 50 staff and volunteers on GBV and BFA, as well as safe referrals. Next slide, please. Yeah, the main challenge and gaps that we have noted include a challenge relating to cost of transportation to services. We provide structured GBV case management to survivors of GBV, and including medical and MHPSS, but also we do refer the survivors to specialized services like legal aid and safety. However, accessing those services is coming with high costs of transport and or to legal aid or safety services, or even accessing specialized medical support for some of the survivors, which is becoming barrier to access of services. And sometimes due to severity of some of the cases, you will find that some caseworkers or GBV staff finding themselves donating money out of their own pockets to support GBV survivors with urgent needs who lack those resources. So to address those barriers, we would recommend integration of life-saving cash assistance into survivors' case action plans during case management, to enable GBV survivors to seek emergency medical care or secure temporary shelter or buy food or clothing for themselves. Another challenge that we have been noting is the significant increase in IBV or intimate partner violence. This might be related to the drought and the current emergency, and due to the limited financial opportunities for women and girls amid the drought and displacement. So we would recommend risk mitigation measures to be integrated across the key clusters. For example, cash and voucher assistance, integration to GBV, and also GBV integration to other clusters like livelihoods and CCCM. Another gap that we are seeing is the adolescent girls seem to be left out in the current drought response. They are the most vulnerable to GBV during the emergencies. For example, FGM, early marriage, sexual violence. And they are the most vulnerable during this drought as they lost their support structures. And as I've said, overlooked in the response efforts. So provision of age-appropriate psychosocial support services, and also provision of platforms where the adolescent girls can access information in GBV and SRH is important to be considered during the drought response efforts. So thank you very much. Over to you, Jessica.
Thank you, Hiba, for your very concise presentation as well. I'm happy to note that we are exactly on time, which is quite a feat for us. We do have a lot of questions that have been generated in the chat, which I have been collecting. I think I will start. I also noticed that we have online our colleague Nikiru. So she is also part of the GBV AoR team in Somalia and the GBV gender specialist for UNFPA as well. So we're happy to note that Nikiru, whom I'm sure most of you know as well, is also on the line. I will get started with questions. As I said, if I saw some that looked similar in intent, I'm going to put those together. And just before we start, I noticed that a lot of partners were putting in the chat some of the interventions that they were doing. Just a reminder that everything you see on the dashboards and beyond is collected from our member organizations. So if you don't contribute to the 5 Ws, which is how we track all of this on a regular basis, then your interventions won't be highlighted in discussion forums such as this. So I want to make sure that we're constantly reinforcing the need for all of our partners to really make sure that you fill out your 5 Ws, because now you're seeing exactly why. First, so that we can understand where those gaps are, but also in terms of advocacy and visibility, it's in your best interest as well. So that's my plug before I get into the questions. So I think I'll start with Elizabeth, the GBV AoR team. Maybe we can start with, I know IMC and UNICEF and a few others wanted to know about funding. First, you had asked for 16.2 million. It would be good to know how much you have currently received. And then the second part of that question is, you mentioned what some of the successes or some of the interventions were. For instance, 14 women and girls safe spaces, but this seems like a small number compared to the overwhelming needs that have been discussed today. So how did you go about determining needs? And when you say 14 women and girls safe spaces have been established, is that the end line, or is that just the beginning of establishing more? So two-part question. One is, where are we at funding? And second, how did you develop these needs or the scale of the needs? Over to Elizabeth and the team.
Thank you very much for the question. So on the funding, out of 16.2 million, 30% funding has been secured. And on the 14 women and girls safe spaces, this is based on the criteria used to determine which locations the women and girls safe spaces will be established was based on needs. So there were already existing centers in some places. So what we use to the criteria is where there are huge gaps and needs. So that is the criteria that determined the locations to establish the women and girls safe spaces. Would you like to add something?
No, yes, I think Elizabeth has said, but what I just want to add is that the numbers you are seeing is currently they are existing, as Elizabeth said, that they already exist in centers, but these figures you see is more related to facilities that is either temporarily in Playwood established, or maybe established in the facility running right now in the OP1, Operational Priority Area 1, which means that it is a number that we may not have to consider the needs from Operational Priority Area 2 and 3, that is, we are only using those centers that are already existing. So yes, we see and we understand that the number, if you look at it compared to the current needs on the ground, is not something that is reflecting, but this is exactly based on the available resources for the GBV AoR with the different UN agencies, including UNICEF, UNFPA, and other UN sister agents that are facilitating, that are providing GBV facilities. This is what currently that is going on. But also there is ongoing resources in terms of establishing other facilities relate to specifically in operational priority on all spots that is affected by the drought, both UNFPA and UNICEF. We just want to reflect on that.
Thanks, Usman. And are those other operational areas, you mentioned priority area 2, for instance, are those included in the dashboard? Those?
Yes, in the dashboard, it's only included the existing ones, both operated by the GBV AoR partners that are operating those areas. So those new ones that is going to establish is not included there, but it is only the ones that is already existing on the ground.
So a note to partners, if you're planning in the future to establish or think about establishing one women and girls safe spaces or one-stop centers, please do engage with the GBV AoR coordination team to ensure that we're not being redundant and putting in services where others are planning to be or that already exist. And maybe Khalid, can you put in the link to those dashboards so that people can have easy access to them?
Okay, great.
Thank you very much. We had another question around safe houses. We mentioned a lot women and girls safe spaces, but they are not the same as safe houses. For instance, can you give us a little briefing on the status on, are there safe houses for GBV survivors? And what is the longer term solutions for individuals or survivors who are at continual risk and who would not be able to return to their communities? Over to the AoR or JAMA or others if they have. I know that Hiba, you also mentioned women and girls safe spaces as an IMC intervention. So this could also be a question for IMC. I'm going to throw this one over to IMC and then Elizabeth, if you want to add on at the end. So Hiba, the question is about safe spaces, but also safe houses. Are there safe houses in drought affected communities for survivors? And what are the longer term solutions for those who are not able to return to their communities? Over to you, Hiba.
Thank you, Jessica. IMC doesn't implement safe houses. We have women and girls safe spaces, but not safe house. But we do referrals to the existing safe houses in drought affected areas, like in Mogadishu. There are some few partners who provide that particular service of safe house. So IMC doesn't provide that service, but also sometimes you find that the survivors might seem to be reluctant to use or access those safe houses, because as you said, sometimes it happens that the safe houses can't act as a permanent solution, because even if you refer the survivor to the safe house, you'll find them sometimes still suffering or going back to the perpetrator. For example, a married woman going back to her husband because there's nowhere else that she can go. And this also, again, highlights the need for integration of cash and voucher assistance in case management action plans, because most of the times you'll find that survivors need to, for example, adolescent girls who or young women who are married, who need to go back to their families, but they don't have the resources to cater for transportation to traveling back to their families, for example. And if the programming can't support such needs, it means that safe house is not a permanent solution. It can be temporary solution for the problem, but not long term.
Thank you, Hiba. I'm going to turn it over to Nkiru. Any more reflections on safe houses versus, we know there is a difference, that women and girls safe spaces are very different from, say, a women's or a safe house. But Nkiru, I'm going to turn it over to you. Is there any conversations or discussions around safe houses being expanded in drought affected areas? Nkiru?
Okay, thank you, Jessica, and thank you, colleagues. UNFPA actually supports safe houses in Somalia, but these safe houses are not necessarily now in the drought-affected areas of operations 1, 2, or 3. They may really be in operations 3, but operational area 3, but not necessarily in operational areas 1 and 2. This is why mostly what we have in operational areas 1 and 2 are women and girls safe spaces, where they receive first line response, or they do recreational activities and all that. So, but we're moving more towards integration of women and girls spaces with SRH, where where also women and girls can receive, who are affected by the drought, can receive a BMOC, services, family planning advice, and etc. But that is because of the situation we have now in Somalia. There are discussions going on to begin to identify community transitory shelters for women and girls who may be trying to escape violence. So this means that we are talking with partners who are working in these communities to identify some kind of shelter from community members who are willing, so that if we have an example of a person or somebody who is going, or a woman or a girl who is escaping violence, who is threatened, who want to have a temporary shelter, we could really refer temporarily to to that community safe house. So it's like a person's house, a person who will be willing to assist in helping us to shelter a woman or a girl who is escaping violence. So discussions are discussions are ongoing on this aspect of programming within the drought affected areas. Then we have for the shelters that we have now, we have arrangements in place, because it's responses according to need. If we assess, if the survivor is assessed and the survivor needs to be supported beyond the time that the shelter provides, then the shelter workers, the service providers, are then obligated to see how they can help the survivor to safely reintegrate into society. So it could mean, it depends on the survivor, it could mean they may choose to pay rent, they may choose to help the survivor in any way possible to ensure that the survivor is safely reintegrated, especially when the survivor indicates that he or she does not feel safe going back, that she does not feel safe going back to to the place she was coming from. So these are some of the discussions that are in place right now, especially around identifying individuals who would be able to provide temporary transitory shelters for women and girls who are escaping violence from the drought affected areas. Since we don't have most of our shelters, most of our safe GBV shelters are not within the drought impacted areas. Over to you, Jessica. Thank you.
Thanks, Nikiru. I'm going to give UNICEF, who is another UN agency that's supporting a lot of local organizations. Just to note before I give Sinead the floor, the GBV subcluster, or AoR, in Somalia is composed of 72 member organizations, and this is really key. 79% of those organizations are national or local organizations. And I think globally, probably Somalia represents one of the most sort of localized GBV AoR in the world. So I'm going to turn it over to Sinead real quick from UNICEF. Over to you, Sinead.
Thank you, Jessica, and I hope everyone can hear me okay. My connection isn't very good. Great. Look, I spent the last couple of weeks in Somalia with our teams, and I got to meet a lot of the partners there. And I think, even speaking to the GBV coordination team, like one of the big things that stuck with me is just this real need to adapt modalities. Like, yes, one-stop centers are there, women in safe, girls safe spaces, but even with the very dispersed nature of the crisis, like using new modalities like mobile teams is really important, and it's what we're going to be working towards, and more safe spaces. But I think you touched on it just now, like we're working with a high proportion of local organizations, and there's a real need to continue to scale up the investment in their technical capacity. And I think, definitely at the GBV AoR level, but also at individual agency levels, it would be really useful to come up with a coordinated response to build that capacity. as well as agreeing on minimum set of services across different modalities, because I do think that that is something that is a bit lacking at the moment, and just having more targeted support to these to all organizations there. Over.
This is well noted, Sinead. And I also want to say that a lot of organizations are being funded by multiple either national or global or international organizations. So just to note this as well, that the needs are overwhelming. And in some areas, we don't have a huge amount of partners doing the work. So I want to make sure that we have about 8 minutes left, and I want to get to some of the other questions. First, I want to do a shout out to CARE International, who is also the co-chair of the Regional GBV Working Group for East and Southern Africa. But in Somalia, they were very good to let us know that they're doing a rapid gender analysis in the emergency, in the drought affected areas, so that they will share with us when it is complete. I see Everjoy on the line. We really do appreciate CARE's rapid gender assessments, because they do give us a depth of analysis. So maybe you can tell us when that report, or even just put it in the chat, Everjoy, when we can expect that report. And also noting that CARE is doing a wide safety audit in many different locations, and are going to collate that information as well, which will look at more risk mitigation areas. So maybe Everjoy, if you could put in the chat when you think the gender analysis report will be done, so that our members can look for it as well, because I know that we all get good information out of that. Just a couple more questions. Why don't we go to either Jama or Hiba? Maybe we'll start with Jama. There were a couple questions on how we are going about how partners are integrating GBV risk mitigations in other sectors. So Jama, I'll start with you and then maybe go to Hiba, because I know that you mentioned that on the first slide of your presentation. So Jama, the question is, how are partners in Somalia integrating GBV risk mitigations into other key clusters, such as nutrition and health and WASH and food security?
Thank you so much, Jessica. That is one of the gaps that we have, and partners who are working on nutrition, food security, and WASH, they don't normally consider mainstreaming of their projects on a GBV. For instance, you will see WASH clusters making toilets or latrines which are far from the residents of the households, or maybe a water point which is far from a walking distance from the resident or the IDB. So such scenario, there is a need for the national GBV also, and regional GBV subclusters to also have integrations, meetings, and coordination with the other clusters, so that they can force or maybe advocate for them to reintegrate or to mainstream the GBV aspects to the other sectors. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jama. So also from Jama, a note that we need to do better, I'm hearing. And Hiba, you mentioned it as well in your presentation that you are integrating. Any quick comments on those two questions about integration, Hiba, from IMC?
Yeah, thank you, Jessica. In terms of GBV integration into other sectors, IMC has WASH, nutrition and health sectors all integrated into GBV. For health, actually we have our own GBV facilities, like the women and girls safe spaces and case management facilities inside the health centers. So we make sure that we train all, we train health staff like nurses and midwives on CMR, GBV basic concepts, and so on. For WASH, we also do some sort of integration, including training of the community hygiene promoters to enable them support survivors of GBV while they are interacting with the community. We also, the GBV sector of IMC, we also do safety audits. We conduct safety audits on periodically, where we share those findings with our WASH sector, and they do incorporate all those findings in their work plans. Like if they're going to establish or construct latrines or water points in the IDPs, they consider those findings in their work plans and implementation. For the nutrition, we also support mother-to-mother support groups and the nutrition staff with capacity building opportunities. We are also planning now in plan of integrating psychosocial support in GB and in nutrition. Since we are seeing a lot of malnourished children in IMC's operated stabilization centers, SCs, we are in process of integrating psychosocial support in nutrition, where we will provide BSS sessions for the mothers of those malnourished children. So there's always room for improvement, but that's what we are doing now so far.
Okay, thanks, Hiba. Those are some really great examples on how IMC, who does do direct GBV programming, but also, and this is key, and I will hope all of us sort of internalize this, how are we actually even integrating within programs within our own agencies? So lots of UN agencies here who do multi-cluster work, and lots of international agencies who do multi-cluster work. So even within house, how are we making sure that GBV risk mitigation is integrated? I know we're at time, but I have two questions to end our session. One is, we had quite a few comments about adolescent girls, specifically that it was mentioned that they are identified as one of the most vulnerable groups in Somalia at this time, particularly because they are vulnerable to different types of GBV. And so the question, I guess, would be specific question: are there concerns for girls accessing services, adolescent girls? Have you come across any barriers to adolescent girls accessing services? And I know Hiba and Jama both mentioned adolescent girls as vulnerable groups. So Jama, very quickly, the question is, are there concerns that girls accessing services? Just very quickly.
Actually, there are concerns. Adolescent girls are not accessing services as well as education centers. They normally stay in home, and normally they prepare food for the family, and as a household activities only, and they are not allowed to go. That's one of them. And there are also some people who don't want the adolescent girls to go through or seek service, or maybe they will be feeling shy or mitigation to seek services.
And Hiba, any one or two comments, just very quickly, about accessing services, adolescent girls? Very quickly.
Yeah. Thank you, Jessica. The adolescent girls, yes. For example, the women and girls safe spaces that we have, those safe spaces are not designed to accommodate specific services for adolescent girls, but we try to incorporate their needs in the women and girls safe space work plans. But you will find that because of those different dynamics and different needs of adolescent women, I mean, women and adolescent girls, sometimes it becomes difficult for adolescent girls to access services.
Okay, thank you, Hiba. So this is well noted. I also want us to note that I think a good takeaway from those questions and from the responses, that adolescent girls need to be in terms of accessing services, they are their own specific group, and you can't just lump them in, for instance, with adult women or even children, because they are a distinct population group that we need to make sure our services are that they're able to access. So thank you for that. And please, as a takeaway from this, I think that was universally recognized that adolescent girls in this crisis are especially vulnerable to gender-based violence. And we don't have time for a long response, but I just want to make note for our GBV AoR coordination team in Somalia. Lots of good comments in the chat box about how are we going to address capacity building at subnational level as an AoR coordination team. And I'm not sure we have the answer at this point, but there were lots of comments about the need to have a standardized and coordinated capacity building plan for those member organizations who are doing frontline work and are being pushed to expand the type of program that they're doing. And so I think that is also a key takeaway from this conversation today. One about adolescent girls, and then also the second is about how we plan to coordinate capacity building for local organizations. Before Osman, last comment by Osman, who's from our coordination team, and then I'll close out the session. Go ahead, Osman.
Jessica, can you hear me?
I can hear you well, Osman.
Okay, so I just want to reflect on that point. We had, after the activation of the scale up in Somalia, we plan to do, we have done it, conduct the training for the GBV AoR sub-national level, just to share the information, sub-national level coordinators at the field level, and which is something that we called out, and we have gone to the field level, both the different hubs that we have the coordinations of which we have done the training, and we are planning to do, and that's why we all in the presentation we mentioned that in terms of capacity building, we have done the training of the CMR for the for TOTs, you know, terrain of trainers, and we are planning, this is where by the mid-November we are going to start doing capacitating with the service providers in terms of how are they going to do these services. So there will be a step down training that is planned that is going to happen mid-November to late December. So just want to reflect on that in terms of the capacity building plans.
Perfect. And I see Elizabeth in the chat has also mentioned that there is a plan in place. So well noted, as we know that that is one of our main takeaways from this chat, is the need for capacity building. And a question was the AoR's sort of perspective on that. So thank you, Osman, and thank you, Elizabeth, for highlighting that there is a plan in place. So please do contact our team, the coordination team, the GBV AoR Somalia coordination team, if you have any questions or concerns. Just a reminder that it's so important for you to fill out those 5 W's. That's the who, what, where, when, why documents that are sent out regularly by the team, because that really helps us. As you saw today, it helps us understand where the needs are in terms of programming and also the gaps. So please do fill out the 5 W's. And if you are supporting partners, local organizations, really encourage them to do the same. We have some great partners here. We have Khalid and Osman who can help you fill that out. If you're feeling a bit nervous about doing the sheet, they can help you and are always available to do that. So please note that as well. I want to thank you for joining us today, particularly Jama and Hiba, who are joining us from the front lines in Somalia, who are working in those drought affected communities even today. We thank you for your work. I can't imagine what you're experiencing there, you and your teams, but we do appreciate your work. So if you have, as I said, if you have any questions, please contact the team. The presentations as well as the recordings will be sent to all of those who registered. We do have your presentation, we do have your email addresses. And if you would also like to access that at a later time, you can always find it on our global website, which is gbvaor.net. If you are interested in learning more, I saw that there was a question about male survivors. Please do join the regional GBV working group for East and Southern Africa. We have an emerging practice series, and this month's topic will be survivor-centered health responses for male survivors, and it's a multi-method study. That will be this Friday at 10:30 a.m. If you would like to join us for that discussion, please do so. You can reach out to the regional team, either myself, Jessica, or Laureen Wasonga, who is my co-chair here at the Regional GBV Working Group for East and Southern Africa. Thanks so much for joining us, and I hope you have a good afternoon. Thanks, everyone. And thanks again to Hiba, Jama, Elizabeth, Khalid, and Usman, and Nikiru for joining us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, colleagues, all of you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.